The wrench slipped from Nora Jensen's paint-stained fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of her art studio. Echoing through the cavernous space she'd called home for the past 3 years. She stared at the eviction notice taped to her door, its crisp white paper mocking her with words like new ownership and 30 days to vacate. Her murals covered every inch of these walls, her life's work bleeding into the brick and mortar of this old warehouse building in downtown Portland. The building she'd poured her soul into transforming. The building some stranger had apparently just purchased without warning. She ripped the notice down, crumpling it in her fist. Her best friend, Maya, had warned her about not having a lease agreement with old Mr. Patterson. But the elderly landlord had been content with handshake deals and cash payments. Now he'd sold the building without even giving her a heads up, and she was supposed to just pack up and leave like none of this mattered. The heavy steel door at the building's entrance groaned open. Nora's head snapped toward the sound, her dark hair swinging across her shoulders. Footsteps echoed up the stairs, confident and measured. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the building was supposed to be locked. A man appeared at the top of the staircase, and Nora's first thought was that he looked completely out of place. Tailored navy suit, expensive leather shoes that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and a face that belonged on magazine covers rather than in dusty warehouses. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair styled just perfectly imperfect and eyes that caught the light streaming through her studio windows. "You must be Nora Jensen," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "And you must be the person who bought my building," she shot back, crossing her arms over her paint-splattered overalls. "Yates Harper." He extended his hand, walking further into her studio. His gaze swept across the space, taking in the massive canvases leaning against walls, the sculptures made from reclaimed metal, the explosion of color that covered every surface. "I own Harper Development. We specialize in renovating historic buildings." Nora ignored his outstretched hand. "I got your eviction notice." Yates lowered his hand, seemingly unfazed by her hostility. "It's a standard notice. I'm planning to convert this building into luxury condominiums. The location is prime and the structure has good bones." "The structure has good bones." Nora laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This building has a soul, it has history, and I've made it my home. I understand this is difficult, but you don't have a legal lease. Mr. Patterson made that clear during the sale." Yates walked over to one of her larger paintings, a swirling abstract piece in deep blues and golds. "This is remarkable work." "Don't patronize me," Nora said sharply. "You can't just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built because you see dollar signs." Yates turned to face her fully, and she noticed his jaw was set firm, his expression businesslike but not unkind. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm creating housing that this city desperately needs, quality housing. And I'm giving you 30 days to find a new location, which is more than legally required." 30 days, Nora repeated flatly. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to find affordable studio space in this city, especially space like this?" She gestured around the massive room with its 20-foot ceilings and wall-to-wall windows. "I understand it's challenging, but that's not really my problem, Miss Jensen." The words hung in the air between them, cold and final. Nora felt her chest tighten with anger and something else, something that felt dangerously close to tears. She refused to cry in front of this man with his perfect suit and his casual dismissal of her entire life. "Get out," she said quietly. Yates studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you need help finding alternative space, I have contacts in commercial real estate." "I said get out," He placed the card on her work table and walked back toward the stairs. At the top of the landing, he paused. "I'll be overseeing the renovation personally. I'll be around quite a bit over the next few weeks." Nora waited until she heard the main door close before she sank down onto her paint-stained couch, the crumpled eviction notice still clutched in her hand. She looked around at her sanctuary, at the life she'd built from nothing, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. She'd come to Portland 5 years ago with nothing but an art degree, a battered pickup truck, and a desperate need to escape her small hometown in Idaho. She'd worked 3 jobs while building her reputation as an artist, taking on commission work and teaching classes to kids at the community center. When Mr. Patterson had offered her this space, it had felt like fate, like the universe was finally rewarding her for not giving up. Now some millionaire developer was taking it all away. Nora grabbed her phone and called Maya, who answered on the second ring. "He actually came here," Nora said without preamble. "The guy who bought the building. He just showed up at my door." "What? Are you serious?" Maya's voice pitched higher. "What did he say?" "That he's turning the building into luxury condos and I have 30 days to leave." Nora stood and started pacing. "He was so calm about it, Maya, like he was discussing the weather, just business, nothing personal." "What's his name?" "I'm Googling him right now. Yates Harper. He owns Harper Development." There was a pause, then Maya whistled low. "Okay, so I'm looking at his company's website and Nora, this guy is legitimate. Harper Development has renovated like 15 buildings in the Pacific Northwest, all high-end stuff. He's only 32 and his company is worth millions. Great, so he's a rich jerk instead of just a regular jerk. I'm just saying, he's not some fly-by-night developer, which actually makes this worse because he definitely has the resources to follow through." Maya sighed. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Nora admitted, stopping in front of her favorite mural, a piece she'd spent 2 months creating. It depicted a phoenix rising from ashes, all fierce oranges and reds. "I can't leave, Maya. I can't just walk away from all of this." "You might not have a choice." "There's always a choice," Nora said, her jaw setting with determination. "I'm not making this easy for him." Over the next 3 days, Nora researched every legal avenue available to her. She met with a tenant rights attorney, who told her what she already knew. Without a lease, she had no legal standing. She contacted the Portland Historic Preservation Society, but the building wasn't old enough or significant enough to qualify for protection. She even started an online petition to save the warehouse, which garnered a few hundred signatures, but nothing substantial enough to make a difference. On the 4th day, Yates Harper showed up again. Nora was in the middle of working on a commission piece, completely absorbed in the rhythm of brush against canvas, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Something about the confident cadence was distinctly Yates Harper. "You're still here," he observed, walking into the studio like he owned it. Which, technically, he did. "Very observant," Nora replied without looking at him, adding a stroke of crimson to the canvas. "I brought the architectural plans." "I thought you might want to see what we're planning for the building." "I don't." Yates was quiet for a moment and Nora could feel his gaze on her. "Are you always this stubborn? Are you always this entitled?" She finally turned to face him, brush still in hand. He dressed down today, relatively speaking. Dark jeans, a gray sweater that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, leather jacket. He looked infuriatingly good. "I'm trying to be courteous here," Yates said, his tone remaining even. "Most developers wouldn't bother." "You want a medal for basic human decency?" A muscle in his jaw tightened, the first crack in his composed exterior. "You know what? No. I don't need a medal and I don't need your approval. I came here to show you the plans as a courtesy, but clearly you're more interested in being hostile. You're taking away my home and you expect me to be what, grateful? Nora set her brush down and moved closer to him. You don't get to play the victim here, Mr. Harper. You're the one with all the power in this situation. I'm not playing victim. I'm trying to do business. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect style. And for the record, I didn't know about you when I bought this building. Patterson never mentioned he had a tenant. Because I wasn't just a tenant, we had an understanding. An understanding isn't a legal contract. Yates's voice softened slightly. Look, I get that this is hard, but I've invested a significant amount of money into this property. I have investors, contractors, timelines. This isn't personal. It's personal to me, Nora said quietly. They stood there in the afternoon light streaming through the windows, the studio silent except for the distant sound of traffic below. Yates looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. How long have you been painting? He asked, his tone different now, genuinely curious rather than businesslike. The question caught her off guard. Since I was 7. My mom gave me a set of watercolors for my birthday. Yates walked over to the wall where she'd hung several smaller pieces. These are incredible. You have a real gift. Is this the part where you try to win me over with compliments? This is the part where I tell you the truth. He studied a painting of Portland's skyline at dusk, all moody grays and soft pinks. I can appreciate good art even if we're on opposite sides of a business transaction. Despite herself, Nora felt her hostility waver slightly. Why development? She asked. Why buy up old buildings and turn them into expensive housing? Yates was quiet for a moment, his hands in his pockets. My dad was a contractor. Blue collar, worked with his hands his whole life. We lived in a terrible apartment when I was growing up, a place that was falling apart because the landlord didn't care enough to fix anything. My dad always talked about how buildings should be treated with respect, how they should be maintained and loved. He turned to face her. When he died, he left me enough money for college. I studied business and architecture, started my company 5 years ago. I renovate buildings the way my dad would have wanted, with attention to detail and quality. I'm not trying to destroy history. I'm trying to preserve it while making it functional for modern living. Nora hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected him to have depth beyond the expensive clothes and business cards. I'm sorry about your dad. Thank you. Yates glanced at his watch. I should go. I have a meeting with the contractor in an hour. But Nora, I meant what I said about helping you find new space. I know people in the industry. Let me make some calls. Why would you do that? Because maybe it doesn't have to be completely adversarial. He headed toward the stairs, then paused. And because your work deserves a proper space. After he left, Nora stood in the middle of her studio, thoroughly confused. She wanted to maintain her anger to keep him firmly in the category of villain, but he was making that difficult. The story about his father felt genuine, not like some calculated move to manipulate her. She picked up her brush and tried to return to her painting, but her concentration was shot. Yates came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. At first, he had legitimate reasons meeting with inspectors, showing the space to his architect, taking measurements. But as the days progressed, his visits became longer and less obviously necessary. He'd arrive in the late afternoon and stay for hours, sometimes working on his laptop from her couch, sometimes just watching her paint. Don't you have an office? Nora asked on the 8th day of this routine, mixing colors on her palette without looking at him. I do. It's downtown, about 15 minutes from here. Then why are you always here? Yates looked up from his laptop. The lighting is better for reviewing architectural plans. That's a terrible excuse. Maybe I like watching you work. Nora's hand stilled. She turned to find him watching her with an expression that was difficult to read. You're very strange for a millionaire developer. How many millionaire developers do you know? You're the first, she admitted. But I imagine most of them don't spend their free time hanging around in buildings they're about to demolish. I'm not demolishing it. I'm renovating it. He closed his laptop and stood, stretching. And maybe I'm trying to understand what I'm displacing. Having a crisis of conscience, something like that. He walked over to her current project, a large-scale piece she'd been working on for weeks. It was a departure from her usual style, more figurative, depicting a woman standing at a crossroads. This is different from your other work. Sometimes I like to challenge myself, Nora said, studying the painting with a critical eye. Try new techniques, new subjects. Is she you? Yates asked, gesturing to the figure in the painting. Maybe, or maybe she's everyone who's ever had to make an impossible choice. What choice are you facing? Nora set down her palette and faced him. Whether to fight until the bitter end or accept reality and try to move on with some dignity intact. Those aren't your only options, Yates said quietly. What other options are there? You own the building. You have plans. I have no legal standing. She threw up her hands. I've exhausted every avenue. The petition didn't help, the Preservation Society can't help, and I can't afford a lawyer even if there was a case to make. Yates was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Let me ask you something. If money wasn't an issue, what would your ideal scenario be? I'd stay here, Nora said without hesitation. This is my home, my workspace, my sanctuary. I'd stay and keep creating and never have to worry about someone taking it away from me. What if there was a way to make that happen? Nora laughed bitterly. Unless you're planning to give me the building, I don't see how. Not give. But what if you could have a permanent space here after the renovation? She stared at him. What are you talking about? Yates pulled out his phone and opened a file, showing her the architectural plans. The building will have 8 residential units, all 2 or 3 bedrooms, but the ground floor was designated for commercial retail space. What if instead of retail, we made it an art studio? Your art studio. Nora's heart started beating faster. I could never afford rent in a building like this. What if the rent was subsidized? What if part of the development agreement included providing affordable artist space? You can do that. It's my building. I can do whatever I want. Yates zoomed in on the floor plan, showing her the proposed layout. The ground floor is 3,000 square feet. We could design it specifically for your needs. Proper lighting, storage, dedicated work areas, whatever you need. Nora wanted to feel hopeful, but she'd learned to be cautious. Why would you do this? Honestly, Yates met her eyes. Because you're right. Buildings do have souls, and this building's soul is art. Your art. It wouldn't feel right to erase that completely. And it has nothing to do with you feeling guilty. Maybe it has everything to do with that, he admitted. Is that so bad? Nora looked at the floor plan, her mind racing with possibilities. A permanent space. A space designed for her work. Security she'd never had before. It felt too good to be true. There has to be a catch, she said. No catch. Though I'd need you to move out during the renovation, obviously. It'll take about 6 months, but after that the space is yours. Yates put his phone away. Think about it. You don't have to answer right now. He left shortly after, leaving Nora alone with her thoughts and a possibility she hadn't dared to imagine. She called Meyer immediately. He offered you what? Maya practically shrieked through the phone. A permanent studio space in the renovated building, Nora repeated, pacing the length of her studio. Custom designed, affordable rent, everything. Nora, that's incredible. Why don't you sound more excited? Because I don't understand why he's doing this. He doesn't owe me anything. This is going to cost him money, flexibility with the space, potential rental income from retail. It doesn't make business sense. Maybe it's not about business, Maya suggested. Maybe he likes you. Don't be ridiculous. He barely knows me. He's been coming to your studio every day for over a week. That's not normal developer behavior. He's just overseeing his investment, Nora protested, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. There was something else happening between them, something she wasn't ready to name. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Maya said. But Nora, seriously, are you going to accept his offer? I don't know. I need to think about it. But thinking about it meant thinking about Yates Harper, and that was becoming increasingly complicated. Over the past week and a half, she'd seen beyond the polished exterior. She'd watched him roll up his expensive sleeves and help her move a heavy sculpture when her back was bothering her. She'd caught him genuinely laughing at one of her sarcastic comments, his whole face transforming with the smile. She'd noticed the way he brought her coffee without asking, always prepared exactly how she liked it after observing her own brewing routine. He was getting under her skin, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. The next day, Yates arrived with takeout from a Thai restaurant. "You mentioned you liked Pad See-Ew," he said, setting the bag on her work table. "And I figured you probably forgot to eat lunch again." Nora eyed him suspiciously. "Are you trying to bribe me with food? Is it working?" Despite herself, she smiled. "Maybe." They ate together, sitting on the worn couch with containers balanced on their laps. Yates asked her about her work, really asked, wanting to know about her process and inspiration and the stories behind specific pieces. Nora found herself opening up, telling him things she rarely shared with anyone. "I paint because it's the only time I feel completely present," she explained, gesturing with her chopsticks. "Everything else falls away. No anxiety about bills or the future or what people think of me. Just color and canvas and possibility." "I envy that," Yates said. "I'm always thinking 3 steps ahead. It's good for business but exhausting for everything else. You never just exist in the moment, not often." He set down his container and looked at her. "But I do when I'm here." The air between them felt charged suddenly, heavy with something Nora couldn't quite define. She became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how she could see the exact shade of his eyes in the afternoon light, how his presence had become something she anticipated rather than dreaded. "Yates," she started, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. "You're going to say no, aren't you?" he asked quietly. "To the studio space?" "I haven't decided yet." "What's holding you back?" Nora set down her food and stood, needing distance to think clearly. "It feels too easy. Like there's something I'm missing. You're basically offering me everything I want and I don't understand what you get out of it." Yates stood too, shoving his hands in his pockets. "What if I said I get to see you keep doing what you love? Is that reason enough?" "That's not a business decision, that's a personal one. Maybe it's both." He took a step closer. "I know we started off badly and I know you have every reason not to trust me, but Nora, I'm not trying to manipulate you or take advantage. I'm trying to make something right." "Why?" The word came out softer than she intended. "Why do you care so much?" Yates was quiet for a long moment, and Nora watched emotions flicker across his face. Finally, he said, "Because when I look at what you've created here, I see passion and dedication and real artistry. The kind of thing that should be protected and nurtured, not bulldozed for profit. And because somewhere along the way, this stopped being just business for me." Nora's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I look forward to coming here every day. I'm saying I think about you when I'm not here. I'm saying that maybe the reason I'm offering you this space is because I can't stand the thought of you leaving." He ran a hand through his hair, looking vulnerable for the first time since she'd met him. And I know the timing is terrible and the situation is complicated, but there it is. Nora's heart was racing. Part of her wanted to run to protect herself from the risk of getting hurt, but another part, a braver part, wanted to step closer. "This is crazy," she said. "We barely know each other." "Then let's get to know each other. For real, without the building and the eviction notices and the business hanging over us." Yates met her eyes. "Have dinner with me. Somewhere that's not here, where we can just be two people talking." "That's a terrible idea," Nora said, but she was smiling. "I've been told I have a lot of those." He smiled back, and it transformed his entire face. "Is that a yes?" "It's a maybe. I'll think about it. I'll take it." Nora did think about it. She thought about it while working on her paintings, while lying in bed unable to sleep, while Meyer interrogated her over coffee about what was happening between her and the hot developer. "You like him," Maya said, stating it as fact rather than question. "It's complicated," Nora protested weakly. "It's only complicated if you make it complicated. He's interested, you're interested, go to dinner." "He's trying to kick me out of my studio." "No, he's trying to give you a better studio and also take you to dinner. Those are two very different things." Nora groaned, dropping her head to the table. "When did my life become a romance novel?" "About the moment a handsome millionaire walked into your studio and started making googly eyes at your paintings." "He does not make googly eyes." "He absolutely does. I've seen the way he looks at your work. And the way he looks at you, which is even more googly." Despite her reservations, Nora found herself looking forward to Yates's visits with increasing anticipation. He started bringing her materials she mentioned needing, never making a big deal about it, just casually producing a specific shade of paint or a new set of brushes. He listened when she talked about her frustrations with a difficult piece and offered perspectives that were surprisingly helpful. He made her laugh with dry observations about the construction industry and stories about disastrous renovation projects from his early career. 3 days after his dinner invitation, Nora finally gave him an answer. "Yes," she said without preamble when he arrived at the studio. Yates looked up from where he was examining a crack in the wall. "Yes to dinner. Yes to dinner. But we need ground rules. I'm listening. We don't talk about the building or the renovation or any business stuff. It's just dinner between two people getting to know each other." "I can work with that," Yates said, and the smile he gave her made her stomach flip. Friday night, Friday works. Friday arrived faster than Nora expected. She spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear, finally settling on a simple black dress that Meyer insisted made her look sophisticated rather than like she was trying too hard. She left her hair down in loose waves and applied makeup with a hand less steady than when she painted. Yates picked her up from her studio at 7, and Nora's breath caught when she saw him. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, the top button of his shirt undone, and he looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "You look stunning," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she managed. He took her to a French restaurant overlooking the river, intimate and elegant without being pretentious. They sat at a corner table with a view of the city lights reflecting on the water. And for the first time since they'd met, Nora felt the tension between them shift into something lighter. True to their agreement, they didn't talk about business. Instead, Nora learned that Yates had a younger sister who taught second grade in Seattle, that he was terrible at cooking but exceptional at finding great restaurants, and that he'd wanted to be an architect before switching to business. "Why did you switch?" Nora asked, swirling wine in her glass. "Because I realized I was better at seeing the big picture than the details," Yates explained. "I love design, but I'm more interested in the overall vision, how a building fits into a neighborhood, how it serves the community." Business lets me do that. Do you miss it? The creative side. Sometimes, but I get to work with talented architects and designers, which is almost as satisfying. He leaned forward slightly. What about you? Did you always know you wanted to be an artist? I knew I needed to create, Nora said. Whether anyone called it art was secondary. My parents thought it was a phase I'd grow out of. They wanted me to be practical, get a degree in business or education or something with job security. But you didn't. But I didn't, she smiled. I went to art school and spent 4 years learning technique and theory and how to critique my own work. My parents came to my graduation, but you could tell they were disappointed. They kept asking when I was going to get a real job. That must have been hard, Yates said quietly. It was. But I couldn't be anything other than what I am. I tried briefly after college. Worked in an office, wore business casual, attended meetings. I was miserable. Nora took a sip of wine. Finally, I decided that if I was going to fail, I wanted to fail at something I loved. So I moved to Portland and started over. You didn't fail, Yates said. You built something real. The intensity in his gaze made her heart skip. I'm still building it, still figuring it out as I go. Aren't we all? They talked through dinner and dessert, and after dinner coffee, the conversation flowing easily now that the walls between them had lowered. Nora found herself laughing more than she had in months, genuinely enjoying his company without the weight of their complicated situation hanging over them. When Yates drove her back to the studio, he walked her to the door like they were teenagers on a first date. I had a great time tonight, he said, hands in his pockets, looking almost nervous. Me too, Nora admitted. More than I expected, honestly. Should I be offended by that? Probably. She smiled up at him. But you're not. No, I'm not. He took a step closer and Nora's breath caught. Can I see you again? Another dinner that's not about business. I'd like that. Yates reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. For a moment, Nora thought he might kiss her, and she realized she wanted him to. But instead, he stepped back, giving her space. Good night, Nora, he said softly. Good night, Yates. She watched him walk back to his car, her heart pounding and her mind racing. This was real. Whatever was happening between them, it was real and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a pattern. Yates would visit the studio during the day to check on building matters, professional and businesslike. But several evenings a week, they'd go to dinner or walk along the waterfront or visit galleries, and those times were just for them. They were getting to know each other outside the context of landlord and tenant, and Nora found herself falling harder than she'd expected. One evening, about a month after their first dinner, Yates arrived at the studio with a bottle of wine and a sheepish expression. I may have done something without asking permission first, he said. Nora looked up from her canvas, eyebrow raised. Should I be worried? I had my architect draw up some detailed plans for your studio space, the permanent one, in the renovated building. He pulled out a rolled set of blueprints. I wanted you to see exactly what I was envisioning before you made a final decision. Nora wiped her hands on a rag and came over to look. He spread the plans across her work table, and her breath caught as she saw the level of detail he'd included. The space was larger than her current studio, with walls of windows for natural light, dedicated storage areas, a small office nook, even a kitchen area. There's a loading door here, Yates pointed out, so you can bring in large canvases or materials easily. And I included climate control because I researched what's best for preserving artwork. The ceiling height matches what you have now, and we can install track lighting wherever you want it. Nora stared at the plans, overwhelmed. Yates, this is incredible, but this must cost a fortune to build out. It's an investment in the building's character, he said, and in you. She looked up at him, tears pricking her eyes. "Why are you doing all this?" Yates set down the plans and took both her hands in his. "Because over the past month, you've become the most important part of my day. Because watching you create is like witnessing magic. Because when I picture this building's future, you're in it." He squeezed her hands gently. "And because I'm falling in love with you and I want to give you everything that makes you happy." Nora's heart felt too big for her chest. "You're falling in love with me, completely, terrifyingly, absolutely." He smiled, vulnerable and open. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but there it is." "It is crazy," Nora said, but she was smiling through tears. "I'm falling in love with you too, and it's the most inconvenient thing ever." Yates laughed, pulling her close. "The most inconvenient? You're renovating my building. You're technically my landlord. This violates so many practical boundaries." "Forget boundaries," Yates murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm done pretending this is just business or casual friendship or anything other than what it is." Nora tilted her face up and finally, Yates kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might pull away. But Nora wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with everything she'd been holding in. All the fear and hope and desire she'd been trying to ignore. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates kept his arms around her waist. "So about that studio space," he said, his voice rough. "Do you accept, on one condition," Nora said, "anything? I pay fair market rent. I don't want this to be charity or some grand gesture. I want to earn my place there." Yates considered this. "What if we compromise? You pay rent, but it's based on a percentage of your income from your art. That way it's affordable but also fair, and it scales with your success." "That's actually a good solution," Nora admitted. "I occasionally have those." He kissed her forehead. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes. To the studio and to whatever this is between us." "This is me courting you properly," Yates said. "Taking you to dinner, bringing you flowers, earning your trust and your heart." "You already have my heart," Nora said softly. "You had it the moment you told me buildings have souls." They spent the rest of the evening on her couch, talking and kissing and making plans. Yates would start the renovation in 2 weeks, which meant Nora needed to find temporary space. He helped her research options and offered to cover storage costs for her larger pieces. "I can't let you pay for that," Nora protested. "Consider it part of the building renovation costs," Yates said. "Temporary relocation of essential building elements." "I'm an essential building element, the most essential." The next month was chaos as Nora packed up her studio and moved her work into storage, and a small temporary space Maya helped her find. It was bittersweet, leaving the studio that had been her home, but exciting knowing what was coming. Yates was constantly checking in, making sure she had what she needed, helping her move heavy equipment despite her protests. "You're going to ruin your expensive suit," she said, watching him carefully wrap one of her sculptures in bubble wrap. "I have other suits. This sculpture is one of a kind." During the renovation, they spent even more time together. Nora would visit the construction site with Yates, wearing a hard hat and watching the building transform. He walked her through every decision, showing her the exposed brick they were preserving, the original wood floors they were refinishing, the modern updates they were installing while maintaining the building's historic character. "My dad would have loved this project," Yates said one afternoon as they stood in what would become her studio. The space was still bare concrete and exposed beams, but Nora could see the potential. "Tell me about him," she said, taking his hand. Yates was quiet for a moment, looking around the space. "He was the hardest working person I ever knew. He'd come home exhausted every day, covered in sawdust or drywall dust or paint, but he'd always make time for me and my sister. He taught me that good work matters, that buildings aren't just structures but places where people live their lives. He turned to her. He died when I was 23, right before I graduated college. I think he would have been proud of what I've built. I think he would have been incredibly proud, Nora said, squeezing his hand. You honor his legacy every day. Yates pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Thank you for understanding that. They stood there in the skeleton of her future studio, holding each other, and Nora felt more certain than ever that this was right. That they were right. The renovation took exactly 6 months, just as Yates had predicted. Nora watched the building transform from a neglected warehouse into something beautiful and functional. The luxury condos he'd created were stunning, maintaining the building's industrial character while adding modern amenities. And her studio, when it was finally complete, took her breath away. The day Yates gave her the keys, Nora walked into the space and felt tears streaming down her face. Everything she'd described wanting was there. Perfect lighting, beautiful exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, more storage than she'd ever dreamed of having. But more than that, it felt like home, like a space that understood her and what she needed to create. What do you think? Yates asked nervously, watching her reaction. It's perfect, Nora whispered. It's absolutely perfect. Look up, he said, and when she did, she gasped. He'd commissioned an artist to create a skylight mural on the ceiling, a gorgeous abstract piece in blues and golds that echoed her own style. Yates, this is too much, she said, but she was smiling through tears. It's exactly enough. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. Welcome home, Nora. She turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you too, so much. Moving into the new studio felt like starting a new chapter. Nora spent days organizing her supplies, hanging her paintings, setting up her work areas. The building's first residents were moving into the condos above, and she loved hearing the sounds of life around her. Yates had been right about creating community. Maya came to visit and declared it the most beautiful studio she'd ever seen. I can't believe this is the same building, she said, spinning around to take it all in. And I can't believe you're dating the guy who made it happen. Neither can I sometimes, Nora admitted. It still feels surreal. You deserve this, Nora, all of it. The studio, the guy, the happy ending. But Nora was learning that happy endings were really just happy beginnings. Life with Yates was wonderful and sometimes challenging. He worked long hours and traveled frequently for projects. She got absorbed in her work and forgot to return calls. They had their first fight about 3 months after she moved into the new studio, a stupid argument about scheduling that escalated because they were both tired and stressed. You're never around anymore, Nora said, frustrated after another canceled dinner. I'm building a business, Nora. I can't just drop everything whenever you want me to. I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking you to prioritize us occasionally. The fight ended with both of them apologizing and promising to communicate better. And they did. Yates started blocking off time specifically for them, putting it in his calendar like any other important meeting. Nora made an effort to be more flexible when work demanded his attention unexpectedly. They found their rhythm. Friday nights were sacred, reserved for dinner dates and long conversations. Sunday mornings, Yates would show up at her studio with coffee and pastries, and they'd spend lazy hours together while she worked on personal projects. He became her biggest supporter, attending her gallery showings and introducing her to collectors. She became his sounding board for new projects, offering perspectives on design and community impact. A year after the renovation was complete, Yates surprised her by showing up at the studio with a proposition. I bought another building, he said without preamble, an old textile factory in northeast Portland. Nora looked up from her painting. Okay, congratulations. I want to do something different with this one. Instead of condos, I'm thinking mixed use. Residential units on the upper floors, but the ground floor would be dedicated artist studios. Multiple spaces, affordable rent based on income, all custom designed. He pulled out plans and spread them on her table. I'm calling it the Collective, a place for artists to work and live and build community. Nora stared at the plans, her heart swelling. Yates, this is incredible, but why? Because you showed me that art matters, that creative spaces matter. That not everything has to be about maximum profit. He took her hands. I want to build something that makes a difference, something my dad would have been proud of, and something that honors what we have together. I don't know what to say, Nora whispered. Say you'll help me design it. You know what artists need better than any architect. Be my consultant on this project. Yes. Absolutely yes. Working on the Collective together brought them even closer. Nora interviewed dozens of artists about their space needs and dream studio setups. Yates worked with his team to create something truly special, a building that balanced beauty with functionality. When it opened a year later, they had applications from over 100 artists for the 15 available studios. The grand opening was a celebration, with local artists displaying their work and the community coming together to appreciate what Yates had created. Nora watched him give a speech about his vision for the project, talking about his father and the importance of supporting creative communities, and felt overwhelming pride. After the event, they walked back to her studio, hand in hand through the Portland streets. Thank you, Yates said quietly. For what? For changing how I see my work, for showing me that business can have heart. He stopped walking and turned to face her. For loving me even when I was trying to evict you from your studio. Nora laughed. That seems like 1,000,000 years ago now. It was barely 2 years ago. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, and Nora's breath stopped. But in those 2 years, you've become everything to me. My partner, my inspiration, my home. Yates, she breathed as he opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. Marry me, Nora. Let me spend the rest of my life building things with you, supporting your dreams, being the person who brings you coffee when you're too absorbed in painting to remember to eat. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely yes. Yates slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, right there on the Portland sidewalk, and Nora felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This was what contentment felt like. What love felt like, what home felt like. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at her studio, surrounded by family and friends and the art that had brought them together. Maya stood as her maid of honor, and Yates's sister flew in from Seattle to be part of the celebration. The space was decorated with flowers and string lights, transformed from workspace to something magical. When Yates said his vows, he talked about how Nora had taught him to see the soul in buildings, to understand that spaces could hold meaning beyond monetary value. When Nora said hers, she talked about how Yates had given her not just a studio but a foundation, not just security but wings to fly higher than she'd ever imagined. I was so angry when you walked into my studio that first day, she said, smiling through tears. I thought you were going to destroy everything I'd built, but instead, you helped me build something bigger and better than I could have created alone. After the wedding, they honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks wandering through museums and historic buildings, combining their passions. Yates took photos of architectural details while Nora sketched in her travel journal. They ate incredible food and drank local wine and talked about their dreams for the future. I want to expand the Collective model, Yates said one evening as they watched the sunset over Florence. create artist communities in other cities, build something sustainable that will last beyond us. That sounds amazing, Nora said, leaning into his side. I want to start teaching more, maybe offer workshops at the collective, help young artists find their voice. We make a good team, Yates said, kissing her temple. The best team. They returned to Portland and threw themselves into their work and their life together. Yates expanded Harper Development, taking on projects that prioritized community benefit alongside profit. Nora's reputation as an artist continued to grow, with galleries across the country featuring her work. But her favorite pieces were always the ones she created in her studio, the space Yates had designed for her with so much love and attention. 2 years into their marriage, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates over breakfast, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure joy. "Really?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Really? We're going to be parents." Yates came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she was precious and fragile. "I can't believe it. We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" Nora asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. "I'm ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic." Pregnancy was challenging but beautiful. Nora continued working in her studio, painting throughout her pregnancy, documenting the changes in her body through art. Yates became impossibly more attentive, constantly checking if she needed anything, reading every parenting book he could find. Their daughter, Evelyn Marie Harper, was born on a rainy October evening, and she was perfect. Tiny and beautiful with dark hair and her father's eyes. Yates held her with tears streaming down his face, looking at Nora with such love and gratitude that she started crying too. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for her, for us, for everything." "Thank you for finding me," Nora said. "For refusing to stop visiting even when I wanted you to leave. Best decision I ever made. Parenthood changed them both." Yates restructured his work schedule to be home more, delegating responsibilities so he could be present for the early months. Nora set up a corner of her studio as a nursery, painting murals of whimsical animals and dreamy landscapes on the walls. She'd work while Evelyn napped in her bassinet, the baby's soft breathing a soothing soundtrack to her creative process. Maya became Aunt Maya, showing up regularly with baby gifts and offers to babysit, so Nora and Yates could have date nights. The artists in the collective sent handmade gifts, creating a beautiful community around their growing family. When Evelyn was 6 months old, Yates came home with news. "I've been offered a major project," he said, bouncing their daughter gently. "A historic hotel renovation in Seattle." "It's huge, Nora. Career-defining huge." "That's amazing," Nora said, but she could see the hesitation in his face. "What's wrong?" "It would mean spending significant time in Seattle, maybe even relocating temporarily. And I know we just settled into this rhythm with Evelyn, and your studio is here, and I don't want to disrupt everything we've built." Nora thought about it carefully. "What if we made it work? You could work in Seattle during the week and come home on weekends." "It's not ideal, but it's doable for a few months." "I don't want to leave you alone with a baby," Yates protested. "I won't be alone. I have Maya, I have the community here, I have my work. And this is your dream project, Yates. You should take it." They made it work, though it was harder than either expected. Yates threw himself into the Seattle project, video calling every night to see Evelyn and check in with Nora. Nora managed the studio and motherhood, creating a new series of paintings inspired by early parenthood, by the exhaustion and joy and overwhelming love. The separation made their weekends together precious. Yates would arrive Friday evening and they'd spend every moment as a family, going to the park, cooking meals together, simply being present. It reminded them not to take each other for granted, to appreciate what they had. The Seattle project took 8 months to complete, and when Yates finally came home permanently, they celebrated by taking a family vacation to the Oregon coast. They spent a week in a beach house, introducing Evelyn to the ocean, collecting shells, watching sunsets as a family. "I missed this," Yates said one evening, Evelyn asleep on his chest while he and Nora cuddled on the couch. "Being home with you every day, I don't think I want to take on projects that require that much distance again." "You have to do what's right for your career," Nora said. "My career is important, but you two are more important. I need to find a better balance." He kissed her forehead. "Maybe it's time to bring on a partner, someone who can handle the traveling projects while I focus more on local developments." Over the next year, Yates did exactly that, bringing on a talented young developer who shared his vision for community-focused projects. This freed him to be more present at home, to watch Evelyn grow from baby to toddler, to support Nora through a major gallery exhibition in San Francisco. By the time Evelyn turned 2, they'd found their equilibrium. Yates's business was thriving with the new partnership structure. Nora's art career had reached new heights, with collectors and museums seeking her work. The collective had inspired similar projects in 3 other cities, creating affordable artist spaces across the Pacific Northwest. One evening, after putting Evelyn to bed, they sat together in Nora's studio, drinking wine and admiring her latest piece. "Remember when you tried to evict me from this building?" Nora asked, a teasing smile on her face. "One of my better ideas," Yates said. "Look where it got me. You're impossible. You love me anyway." "I really do." Nora leaned against him, perfectly content. "I love our life, Yates. Every chaotic, beautiful, unexpected bit of it. So do I." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You know what's funny? That first day I walked up those stairs and saw you standing there covered in paint, looking like you wanted to throw me out a window, I felt something. I didn't know what it was then, but looking back, I think part of me knew." "Knew what?" "That you were going to change my life." "For better or worse?" Nora asked. "For everything, for always." Years continued to pass in that beautiful way they do when life is full and happy. Evelyn grew into a bright, creative child who loved art as much as her mother and building things as much as her father. They had a second child, a son they named Thomas after Yates's father, who had Nora's dark hair and artistic temperament. The studio that had started as a battle between them became the heart of their family life. Evelyn would sit at her own small easel, painting alongside her mother, while Thomas built towers from blocks nearby. Yates would come by after work, and they'd have dinner together in the studio's small kitchen, a family built in a space designed with love. Harper development continued to grow, but always with the philosophy Nora had helped Yates develop, prioritizing community and art alongside profit. Every project included some element of affordable creative space, and the model they'd pioneered became the company's signature approach. Nora's art evolved as she did, her later works reflecting the depth and complexity of a life fully lived. She taught regular workshops at the collective, mentoring young artists the way she wished she'd been mentored. She never forgot what it felt like to struggle, to fight for space to create, and she made sure to pay that forward. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised her by arranging for the original warehouse building, her building, to be designated a cultural landmark. There was a ceremony with the mayor and arts council, celebrating the space and what it represented. "This building is where I learned that love isn't just about grand gestures," Yates said in his speech. "It's about showing up every day. It's about paying attention to what matters to the person you love. It's about creating space, literal and figurative, for them to thrive." Nora stood beside him with tears in her eyes, holding their children's hands, surrounded by the community they'd built together. She thought about that first day, how angry and scared she'd been, how certain that Yates Harper was going to destroy everything she cared about. She couldn't have been more wrong. He'd taken what she'd built and helped her make it stronger, bigger, more permanent. He'd given her not just security but wings. And in return, she'd given him purpose beyond profit, shown him how to build with heart. That night, after the kids were asleep and they were alone in the studio, Nora pulled out a new painting she'd been working on in secret. It showed the building as it had been when they met, rough and industrial, but with golden light streaming through the windows. And in the center, two figures, barely more than silhouettes, reaching toward each other. "It's us," she said unnecessarily. That first day, I wanted to capture that moment before we knew how the story would end. Yates studied the painting, his arm around her waist. "It's beautiful. But you know what I love about it?" "What?" "That we're already reaching for each other. Even when we thought we were adversaries, we were moving toward this." He gestured around the studio, at their life, at everything they'd created. "We were always going to end up here." "You really believe that?" Nora asked. "I really do. Some things are inevitable. Some people are meant to find each other." Nora turned in his arms and kissed him, soft and sweet and familiar. "I'm glad I refused to leave. I'm glad I refused to stop visiting." They stood there in the studio that had started as a battlefield and become a home, holding each other in the space where their story began, knowing that the best chapters were still ahead of them. Outside, Portland glittered in the darkness, full of possibility and promise, just like their future together. Their story wasn't about a millionaire who bought a building or an artist who refused to leave. It was about two people who learned that sometimes the things we fight hardest against become the things we need most. It was about finding love in unexpected places, building something beautiful from conflict, and understanding that home isn't a place, it's who you're with. Yates and Nora had built their forever in that studio, in that building, in that moment when he'd walked up the stairs, and she'd looked at him with fire in her eyes. Everything that came after, all the love and family and life they'd created, started with that first contentious meeting, that first spark of something neither could name but both recognized on some deep level. And years later, when Evelyn asked how they'd met, they'd tell her about the eviction notice and the stubborn artist and the determined businessman, and how sometimes the best love stories start with two people absolutely certain they have nothing in common. They'd tell her about showing up, about paying attention, about building something worth keeping. They'd tell her that love, real love, is both the simplest and most complicated thing in the world. It's choosing someone every day. It's creating space for them to be who they are. It's fighting for what matters and compromising on what doesn't. It's showing up again and again, even when it's hard. And they'd tell her that sometimes, when you least expect it, someone walks into your life and changes everything. All you have to do is be brave enough to let them stay.